we've had always a history of human bias. And that's actually a really important part of the equality machine, where we should not be measuring automation against some kind of ideal perfection, having some system that is unbiased, but rather we should always be asking about comparative advantage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Parton, and you are listening to the Feedback Loop on Singularity Radio. This week, my guest is law professor, author, and distinguished speaker Orly Lobel, who recently published her latest of 3 books, The Equality Machine: Harnessing Digital Technology for a Brighter and More Inclusive Future. In this episode, we explore the thread that weaves through Orly's work, which often emphasizes the way that economic markets, technology, and the human condition interact. Specifically, we take a deep dive into the limitations and future of intellectual property and monopolies, the way in which cynicism and unrealistic standards hold us back from seeing and implementing humanistic technological solutions, and the way in which technology could bring more equality to our societies. So without further ado, everyone, please welcome to the Feedback Loop, Orly Lobel. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up on the topic then. I'm going to start with what we were just talking about before we started recording, which was that all of your books kind of go together. So I would love to know maybe what story you're trying to tell with those 3 books that ties them together with that single thread.
Yeah, all the books are about how we shape markets and shape our culture and our society through decisions that we make collectively, individually, our social norms and ethics, but also policy and how we can actually make our markets better.
And so how's the latest book, Equality Machine, play into this? Because it feels like that has a much more technology-driven focus.
Right. So the equality machine is about technology and our digital future. I will say that Talent Wants to Be Free, my first book, and You Don't Own Me, my second book, do have a technology tilt in the sense that they are about intellectual property, innovation policy, market competition, and competitiveness in general, about who invents and who owns innovation. But The Equality Machine, my new book, is definitely the most technology oriented, in that I look at the current developments in automation, the progress that we've been making with artificial intelligence, with data collection and data mining. And I suggest that our the conversations we've been having as a public, as a community, in the media, and also by government, and kind of what we see in policy, have been pretty flat and skewed in a lot of ways. So if you look at kind of the trajectory in the public perception of where we're going with technology, there has been recently a very alarmist and take on where we are and where we're going. Mm-hmm. So in the book, I show that we need to make sense of what we really fear, what is concerning, what are the risks, but we also very much need to emphasize the potential and the opportunities that are coming with automation, and that a lot of times that's missed in the public conversation that we were having.
Yeah, it seems like you're kind of saying that we're living between 2 polar extremes here, especially in terms of like policy and culture, which is one, it's flat and we do basically nothing. It's kind of like an impotent approach to policy. And then the other side is pure panic. The AI is going to destroy us. Social media is destroying our brains. is this kind of capricious and like very extreme approach to technology kind of what you're rallying against here a bit?
I think that's exactly right, but they're connected. So
Mm,
there is that impotence where we see government and policy makers kind of not understanding what's going on and then saying, we can't do anything. So very recently, I actually critiqued a long Federal Trade Commission report that was actually commissioned by Congress. Congress asked the FTC to look at how we can use AI to battle online harms. And you see this report that is nearly 90 pages long, saying, oh, there's all these tools, there's, AI is happening, industry is adopting it. But then the conclusion is, but it's too rudimentary. We don't know enough. It can cause harm. There's AI bias. We all know about AI bias. So how about we do nothing, Congress? And that's the recommendation. And then you see also the reports that are even worse in the kind of the press releases that are telling the public about the report. They just kind of go all the way. I actually show this in my writing that they in fact allude to kind of Hollywood images of the AI rising and killing its programmer, and kind of explaining why the FTC said do nothing. And so those two polar opposites of the alarmist and then the kind of non-intervention, I actually argue they're very much connected and interrelated, in the sense that we are letting kind of people, a very, very small set of people, kind of the insiders, shape the direction of technology, and everybody kind of on the outside are critics, are talking about the wrongs, about the fails, and not really having skin in the game. And really the book, The Equality Machine, is all about how we all need to have skin in the game, because we all need to shape our future and have, the vocabulary, the common sense, the kind of the ability to challenge conventional wisdom about where we're at, where we're going, what are the advantages, what are really the risks of different systems that are being adopted. And only then are we actually going to have this like rich conversation of, there's certain things that, are better than others. There's certain technologies that are safer, that are more accurate, that are more fair, and others, maybe we should, opt out of or prohibit or ban. But we can't have this kind of very flattened idea of like, oh, we're fearing everything, it's all biased, and we shouldn't use it. And then the train has left the station, as you know very well, like it's happening anyway. So, there's that paradox, exactly like you described, kind of that paradox of the two polars of like, there's so much going on, but we fear it. And then, there's a small set of people and a very small set of places of kind of companies and actually regions that are shaping our future.
Yeah, and how do we, I guess, open up the doors to those kind of walled gardens, so to speak? Because when I think about the technological landscape as it exists right now, I think what was the book, The Big Five or The Big Four or whatever, and it was talking about
Right.
Facebook, Google, Apple, you have Twitter, and these companies are dominant. They're very much, there's a handful of them, yes, but they're basically monopolies on the space. And how do we take those important decisions that they're making with these billion-dollar, revenue accounts and spread them out to the masses so that there is more ability for other people to join the conversation? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are really tough questions. And, competition policy is something that is a frontier right now, antitrust
Hmm.
law, kind of rethinking what makes these companies, these big five, these category kings, as kind of this puzzle that has been bubbling with economists and people like me who study platforms, online platforms, whether it's social media or search engines or apps like writing apps or kind of sharing economy gig apps. What makes it just turns out that that on each category these companies reach a certain maybe not monopoly, but at least a very dominant place in the space. And I think there are a lot that we can do. There is a lot that we can do. So I mentioned my first book, Talent Wants to Be Free. It's actually all about how we need much more competition and labor mobility, job mobility in between jobs, and we there is a role for policy there. So, for example, we should not allow kind of these draconian do not hire, do not poach, non-competes, over defining what proprietary information is, what trade secrecy is, innovation assignments that probably a lot of the listeners know about, like signing away pre-innovation, pre-ever conceptualizing new ideas, signing away so much of your knowledge. So this is kind of like the classic kind of Facebook. Zuckerberg starts, Facebook, and the Winklevosses want his platform because he had kind of informally worked for them. Actually, my second book, You Don't Own Me, is also about these kinds of dynamics with over-collusive employment contracts. So that's a role for policy, but there's a lot more. So in the Equality Machine, I look at public options. So not having, so it goes back to the question that we talked about before of like, if we're not really nudging, pushing, training more people to have the capacities to be in the game, to be part of the conversation, then these technologies are very concentrated and used in kind of very narrow ways. But we can spread, so we need to scale successes, and we need to scale the kind of AI for good that is really each chapter in the Equality Machine is pointing to. So I go to examples in health and advancements in hiring and software for pay equity and online, content moderation that we mentioned before, and search engines and digital personal assistants. The more people that are kind of have a voice of saying, like, this is what we actually want, this is, this can be better. We don't want to accept the defaults that are given to us by Google or Amazon. We want something that is more open source. We want something that has, many more choices. We will be seeing, and we are seeing, more options and kind of a more competitive and broader market in a lot of those contexts. But yeah, it's something that we're kind of constantly battling against, of having too much concentration of power and understanding what shapes that.
So do you think those IP laws are going to be something that changes in the near future, or are going to have to change maybe as we move towards that decentralized open source future, if we're going to bring people into the conversation and maybe address some of these issues?
Yeah, I think already there's a real reason and role for rethinking a lot of our intellectual property laws, even in the low tech context, there's, I think, years of research that shows that we've been overexpanding and overly entrenching knowledge and ideas through kind of policing, the remixing and the policing the uses of so much valuable, human progress. And I can tell this story on, the patent front and the copyright front and trade secrecy, which is an area that I've done a lot of research, and also trademark. There's a lot of empirical research that we've just been kind of overly using. It's like the tragedy of the anti-commons, really kind of overly using the registration of marks and the sticks and the swords of the patent system to really kind of get rid of entrepreneurs, to slow down startups, and the people that have more of the resources and kind of the longevity and the stamina to even bring really frivolous cases that scare investors, that scare off collaborators, will use those sticks. So again, I can tell this story even without now, we're going to get to this with our leaps, the leaps that we're making in technology. But certainly now, when we do have in every single field, automation that is becoming so good, and we need to talk about how good this is. The equality machine is all about. Like, we need to talk about how good, a lot of this technology is getting. I think again the Singularity U is really kind of exceptional, and actually you talking about this, but the public is the public debates, the kind of mainstream debates that I've researched are more about like how bad it is, or like how unready it is, or then making the leap about how it's good in a scary way. So there's kind of that paradox too. But now that we have automated systems that can create music, that can create art, novels, that can solve all sorts of problems, we really need to rethink that idea behind intellectual property of incentivizing a single individual or corporation in investing in research and development, and then getting a monopoly. The patent system is really a monopoly. The copyright system is a monopoly. It's a temporary monopoly of exclusivity over a body of information and knowledge for what is supposed to be a limited period, but has been extended. Definitely with copyright, it's really not a limited period, because it goes over a lifetime from a human perspective. So it really is a moment that is ripe for rethinking all of these systems of, how does innovation happen? What are our human incentives? What are our collective incentives to invent, to create, and how technology is reshaping that?
Yeah, I love that, because I don't think really until you started talking about this that I've made that connection between IP law as a form, I don't want to say of oppression, but like it doesn't provide equality because it keeps people from being able to express themselves, to start businesses, to try to build a life for themselves outside of one of these monopolistic companies, for example. Are there other ways that you see IP law maybe holding people back beyond the economics of things? Is there an equality aspect to IP that we haven't talked about here?
Well, I mean, when you look statistically about who gets patents registered to their names, and who then profits from it, first of all, there's an inequality here between individuals, kind of the standalone image of the individual creator versus the big corporations. And so that's, part of that kind of, if the market is less competitive, then we're going to see, even when an individual is the inventor, the assignment goes to big corporations. But there's also an inequality in terms of gender and race, and in patenting and in other forms of intellectual property. And that too there's multiple sources to these problems. So I talk in the Equality Machine about the ability to find out about where you're valued, where your talent is most valued, and where you're going to be, that your human capital is going to be utilized in the best way. And again, I think technology really helps with that. So for years, the talent market has been not only unequal, and kind of valuing and having these biases and disvaluing certain profiles, certain demographics. But it's also been very concentrated in kind of bringing people through word of mouth, not really allowing a lot of job hopping for certain people who kind of don't know about other jobs, who maybe fear a breach of a non-compete. And digital platforms are changing this. So we're also connected now with information about jobs that's really global. So, kind of think about LinkedIn 3.0, different kinds of platforms that let you know your worth. So one of the puzzles has been, why doesn't the market correct for pay gaps for people? And again, people don't really know their worth. There's this kind of information asymmetry that's always existed between talent and the companies that hire them. And we've had kind of these social norms that are infused with a taboo about talking about your salary, your compensation schemes, including your kind of what are you awarded for, whether you're awarded when you invent something within a company, when you have a patent to your name. And again, so much of this is changing with, it's kind of an endogenous cycle where you see the platforms kind of crowdsourcing information. There's, actual apps that are called Know Your Worth, and you can kind of find out if you're underpaid. And then we also are changing our norms because of that, and we're kind of more willing to job hop, to demand more. We saw this, I guess, in the extreme with the Great Resignation, and it's really the great reshuffling of people really understanding what they value, or rethinking what they value in terms of their careers and their professional development. COVID has also accelerated our abilities to work remotely, to telecommute, to work globally, to travel the world while we're working. So all of this is, again, enabled by technology, but it's also part of our norms. What do we value, and how do we share information, and how do we create? I'll say one more thing about this is that, again, we kind of have differences in social norms on whether we want to patent and to contain, to kind of draw circles, that like walls on the data that we collect, the information, the innovation that we have, versus sharing. And as there's like different communities that are much more about sharing. And so this is, we see this in research institutions, about the norms of like you have choices where you can present a leap in like an algorithm that you've been working on. You can present it in a scholarly setting or at a conference, or you can hide it. You can deem it proprietary. You can try to patent it if it's patentable. And I think that we have different social norms in different communities and even in different countries, different demographics. So there is some evidence that women, for example, have this kind of other looking, kind of more altruistic, wanting to collaborate more and maybe like think about whatever innovation is there. They're happy to share it more freely and not be the kind of homo economicus of like, I'll just share it if you sign an NDA and pay me some royalties for it. Yeah, there's lots of things that are kind of interesting in these corporate cultures and other cultures of institutions, and how sharing happens. But all of this, I think, again, is being challenged by the speed of technological innovation and how technology is enabling so many more leaps in creativity and inventions.
So you were talking there about, I feel like, incentives maybe being one of the big issues behind where technology is going. Do you feel like that's a big part of what's at play here, is that these economic incentives are making people feel like they have to not share this information to make money off of it so that they're hyper competitive?
No, I don't think I would describe it that way. I think it's good to have economic incentives. It's the for-profit motivation is definitely a good motivation to have in the mix, and in competitive industries and markets. It's more that it's kind of this push and pull where rationally, of course, if you have a profit motivation, you should be actually hiring the best talent, and you should look at for the overlooked talent to include. We've had always a history of human bias, and that's actually a really important part of the equality machine, where we talk so much about algorithmic bias. There's all these best-selling books that are called Automating Inequality, algorithmic bias, the new Jim Code, kind of conveying that algorithms are have racial and gender bias. The books that are called Weapons of Math Destruction, that again kind of describe to us all the biases and inaccuracies, and plus kind of pair that with this idea of surveillance capitalism, that data is extracted and used in harmful ways. And the equality machine is not denying that there are risks of algorithmic bias. There have been definitely fails, and there's bad ways to design an algorithm to just replicate and amplify past wrongs or existing inequities in our society. But first of all, and a very important point that we need to kind of keep with us in every discussion when we're looking at systems of, let's say, bot radiologists, automating X-ray screenings, or identifying breast cancer with mammograms, or if we're automating the process of hiring and promotion and pay, and looking at who's evaluating different talent for different purposes, or for education, for credit and loans. um, with all of these processes, it's so important to remember that we're not, or we should not be measuring automation against some kind of ideal perfection, having some system that is unbiased, but rather we should always be asking about comparative advantage. So, we've had disparities and biases and gender and race discrimination in our markets, in our employment settings for forever, whenever human history really started. And we, as someone, so I here at University of San Diego, I'm the director of the Center for Employment and Labor Policy, and I oversee all the employment law and policy programs, and also serve as an expert witness in employment discrimination cases. It's so frustrating to see companies that try to introduce diversity, that try to kind of hold this idea of equality, but inevitably we all hold biases as humans. So when we talk about the black box of algorithms, I ask in the equality machine, which is better, the black box of humans, our tiny brains that are, also algorithms, versus when we have some check on a system we introduce, and like resume parsing or whatever it is, and we can look at the outcomes, we can improve it, we can have it learn from past mistakes, and we have kind of a digital paper trail that keeps track of whether we're doing better on diversity, on equality, on accuracy, on safety, on all the the norms and values that we want to hold close. So always kind of keeping that question of comparative advantage, remembering that we always need to decide in some way. There's no kind of decision-free world. There's no kind of status quo that is free from problems, and that there's a cost when we're not introducing into automation into some systems. Let's say, one of the things that really frustrates me with some reports when you look at, for example, I mentioned radiology and new systems that can screen for different diseases, for different cancers. You'll see a report saying, "Oh, there's it's only like 70% accurate, and so we shouldn't use it until it's 100% accurate." So we're holding this double standard for humans and machines, and also even when it's compared to human radiologists, you see these reports of like, well, when we take two of the most expert human radiologists, they are as good, or maybe they slightly outperform this new system that's an automated system. So the question that we need to ask from an equality perspective is, is it realistic that most people have access to radiologists or to expert radiologists? And of course the answer is no. So again, from a kind of equality perspective, thinking about the potential of digital technology, we need to ask A, the comparative advantage question, and B, the kind of realistic question of costs and ability to scale systems, to improve systems, to have access to systems around the world, globally, improving healthcare and digital literacy and participation in our, in our markets and our economic systems. So all of these questions are very near to and dear to my heart, and that's kind of what I try to work through in the book.
Yeah. So do you feel like this cynicism that comes at technology, that kind of undermines the fact that it's not perfect and that, it has some sort of bias. And in a sense, maybe even like the way the culture wars and the politicization of all this plays into it. So do you think that that's what's core here is, rather than seeing the bright side, as you talk about, of what could happen, this could be medical care for somebody who couldn't afford it at all, and 70% is better than nothing, if that person can get access. Like, are we losing our sight of all of these fantastic routes that we could go to because we want to criticize that technology is not perfect and that it has these flaws, being completely blind to the fact that if we use it, we might open the door for lots of treatment for people or lots of help for people that just currently doesn't exist?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a cynicism and there's kind of these cognitive fails, and so as from a behavioral researcher standpoint, we would call it like a status quo bias, and loss aversion, where like losses loom larger than gains when we're thinking about change. So that is in play, I think, when we're thinking about introducing new systems and new processes. There's also very much, and maybe this is the cynicism, kind of in its focus. There's very much a mindset of, I think it's a very individualistic and probably mostly or more American than even in other countries, this idea of like anti-surveillance, anti-sharing of your individual information. So I show in the Equality Machine that oftentimes we have this privileging of privacy in ways that are really harmful for the common good. So again, not that privacy is not important, not that we shouldn't value certain instances of privacy, but we have to have a much richer understanding of how privacy over the years has served to exclude, to cover up, wrongdoings of by the powerful against people that are more vulnerable. So this assumption that that automation and that data collection is going to harm in patterned ways the more vulnerable is simply not true. I show this at every step of the book, that oftentimes it's really the people at the edge of data, the people who don't have access, that are really being harmed by not being included and counted, and we should count what matters. So all of it is kind of this mindset of if we understand that we can use technology as a force for good, then we have a much better chance to actually carve the path forward in very productive and brighter ways, as you alluded to. It's the subtitle of the book, Harnessing Digital Technology for a Brighter, More Inclusive Future. Paradoxically, when we're just kind of in this mindset of criticizing and being fearful, as we mentioned before, the technology is going to be it's going to be used, but it's going to be used in ways that most of us don't have a say in and don't understand.
Yeah, you spoke there a little bit about the difference between, the American way and maybe the European way, for instance. And it makes me think, one of my first interviews with was a woman named Jenny Kleeman, and she wrote a book called Sex, Robots, and Vegan Meat. And she was concerned about artificial wombs and the way automation was affecting women, because she saw it, I believe, and I don't want to speak for her, but it seemed like she strongly believed it would devalue women. But I believe when I was reading your book that you actually think maybe the opposite, that it might free women from this idea of women's work and kind of open up the landscape for them. Is that fair? And could you speak on that a bit?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in your question, because I can talk also about a lot of cultural and kind of global differences. So I do actually look in the book to understand why Japan has been so much of a leader in robotics and automation and kind of their post-war culture. So a lot of it is kind of cultural histories of how do we understand human machine relationships and how we can embrace rather than fear some of these developments. So I look to Korea and Japan and Europe, but and Europe is a whole other story I can talk about. But on your specific question, and this is a very interesting set of questions about our biological differences from a gender perspective, from sex. As you've seen in the book, I have a whole chapter about sex robots and what do we think about sex robots, and how we think we know what we think about sex robots until we actually try or engage with these accelerating developments and sex tech in general, and then specifically about reproductive technology. So I think you're absolutely right that my stance is that any technology that frees us to reimagine ourselves separate from the biological constraints that we've been born with is an engine for equality. It is part of an equality machine in the sense that we've been so indoctrinated, whether it's nature or nurture, that we have again kind of this very stagnant, very sticky divide in our society of the role of mothers, and of course we see this in very, very alarming and really tragic ways right now in the United States of wanting to control women's bodies, wanting to limit reproductive rights and choice. If we leverage technology to kind of, again, give us the liberties, the freedoms to have more options, to have more choices, I think that's, it's scary in some ways. That's, not denying that it can be misused and abused, and there's a lot of ethics that ethical questions that we need to grapple with, and it's a fascinating conversation, but that's what we need to be doing. We need to to be reimagining and to be again with that kind of idea of skin in the game, understanding what the right boundaries are, and not just saying like, oh, I don't want to think about that, that's too much. Artificial womb is too either sci-fi or kind of categorically unethical in some way. We really need to say much more to understand what do we what can we envision, what do we have as part of our humanity that will allow versus constrain us in moving forward with some of these options.
Would it be fair to say you think we need to stare into the abyss a bit more so that we can find the gold that's hidden there? Because that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this, is that we're so afraid of looking into the darkness to find the good that we don't find the good and we only see darkness.
I love that. Yeah, no, I love that framing, and I think that that's always true, right? Like it's I think it's part of our humanity to live an examined life and to live and examine, like be part of a collective that, looks at what we are, who we are, really asks what we want. And so my argument throughout is that we've always had a lot of things that we value. You asked me before if it's like money that corrupts, if it's individual incentives and for-profit motives that corrupt. And I said, yeah, look, we have a lot of different competing values and competing wants and desires in our society, and that's a good thing. That's part of our a democratic free society, that we value community and we value individualism, we value privacy, but we value safety. And you see some of these tensions. I talk about them in the context of COVID, for example. You want to protect your privacy about your movements, but maybe there are moments where you have to give up, your privacy to stop an infectious global pandemic from spreading. We value free speech, but we also value equality and inclusion, and those are in tension, and that's always been the reality. So as a policymaker, as a law professor, I teach these things. I feel them very deeply, that we always need to have some balancing act, some kind of richness in how do we hold all of these values and norms and kind of future wants as one unified blueprint for our society. And I see technology as helping with all of that. So not disrupting it so much as allowing us actually to retrieve, to stare at the abyss, as you called it, in actually more sophisticated ways. So one thing is that we actually can know so much more with technology about the root causes of inequities. We can see them, the data gives us so much more information. So I start the book actually with describing some, new insights that happen from just having machine learning, put on data from platforms, like scraping different data that is on platforms like eBay or Airbnb, and just kind of seeing it in an illuminating way. Like we kind of have a sense that some platform design will create less gender equality or more inequities, more racial bias or less, and we can see this, we can study this in so much more consistent, robust ways than we've ever been able to before. And so we can see it, we can study it, we can detect, and then we can actually improve. And so kind of putting together that call for staring at the abyss, which I love the way that you described it, with the fact that we have now much more of the capability to do that. With my call of don't always privilege privacy, because we need that data to actually combat things that we don't like, and to improve our algorithms to become more accurate. We don't recognize that tension in and of itself often enough, that there's, when you look at the EU policies on privacy, like GDPR and their EU AI draft, and we look at policies before Congress, there's a kind of like double framing of we need to slow down automation because it's inaccurate and biased, and we should have a human in the loop always, and also we need more privacy and data minimization. And there's that kind of link between them. The more data we have, the more accurate our algorithms become, and we need to recognize that, and we need to talk about that too.
And it seems like in a world that is obviously becoming increasingly complex because of technology, if we don't have some data to track that complexity, we're going to probably get left behind. There's going to be a chasm that forms between our understanding and the complexity of the world, I would think.
Exactly. And but so much good also to celebrate. So
Mhm.
uh again, one of the kind of pleasures of researching in this field and writing the equality machine has been finding so much to celebrate, like um, you know advancements in AI that is tackling climate change and environmental issues and health we talked about, and endangered species, and like poverty and poverty alleviation, and ag tech, agricultural, advances for around the world. And so there, it's actually, again, there's something about, like, you called it cynicism, that maybe just in terms of human temperament, and sometimes the media, they want to report kind of all the wrongs much more frequently than the goods. And I think this is a moment where people are thirsty to actually learn much more
Yeah.
about all the good, and that, again, it's kind of a virtuous cycle, where the more we talk
Mhm.
about the potential and the good, I think that more people will be um, inclined to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to get into all that good that you talked about. I mean, there's so much here that you do that there's a lot of topics and tangents that I think we've been able to explore. But with these last few minutes, I guess that we have, do you have any closing thoughts or ideas that you'd like to just share, let people know about the book, anything at all that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I love your podcast, and I love all the projects. And so I'm eager to hear from listeners about, it's kind of like, you know, uh, the book is a blueprint, and also a call for, just more of a conversation. And so you can connect with me on, all social media platforms, Orly Lobel, and LinkedIn, and Instagram, and Facebook, and Twitter, and the rest of them. And yeah, I would look forward to hearing more thoughts and reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Orly, I really do appreciate your time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.